Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, thank you so much for joining us. US President Donald Trump is back in the US after his historic trip to the Middle East, where he pulled off an extraordinary achievement. While he was there, he met with Israeli leaders, he met with families of hostages, he of course flew to Egypt, met with the Egyptian president, met with dozens of world leaders and signed the Gaza peace deal. Now, he's back in the US in time to honour Charlie Kirk on Tuesday, but Esther, all 20 living hostages are now home. It is incredible to see after more than 700 days.
Yes, absolutely. And the hostages have been through hell these last 2 years. I think we can all agree that Donald Trump has achieved certainly what the previous administration would not have achieved and what many countries in the West would have tried to achieve, but certainly didn't. And I think it speaks to the diplomatic tact of the Trump administration and the fact that they were able to basically rally all the Arab leaders in particular to be in favor of the Gaza peace plan. I think what I find most telling, though, is all the people that have been wanting to see an end to this war and wanting to see an end to the carnage and some progression and some actual realization of some sort of deal, really not giving Donald Trump credit where credit is due. And I think that the term Trump derangement syndrome has never been more apt because these are the kinds of stunts that they pull, and they really kind of nullify the arguments on any kind of policy level, because if you cannot recognize that something like this, these people that have been through absolute hell and carnage, this anti-Semitic hellhole in the ground in Gaza for over 2 years, if you cannot recognize what a feat Donald Trump's administration has achieved by bringing them home, by bringing those families relief, by seeing people that have been separated for 2 years reunited. If you cannot recognize that and say that Donald Trump has done something that is really kind of spectacular, regardless of your reservations of his other policy areas, then you're really quite a mentally unwell person. And we saw this, all the world leaders that basically lined up, the Arab leaders as well, which is remarkable, the fact that they all endorsed this peace plan for Gaza. I mean, this is something that I dare to say only Trump could have achieved.
Agree.
And unfortunately, the side that's supposed to be on the side of peace are really showing that really it wasn't about peace. It was just kind of rearing the anti-Semitic heads. And I wrote a piece last week saying I don't recognize the London that I grew up in, seeing Jewish communities around the country saying that they feel unsafe. Many Jewish businesses had to close on Saturdays, their busiest commercial days in the capital in London, because of these what turned out to be basically hate marches and pro-Hamas demonstrations that have feigned being under the guise of progressing the pro-Palestinian cause. So I think, regardless of where you stand, Donald Trump absolutely should be congratulated for this. And many people who are genuinely concerned for the hostages and for the state of this war are breathing a sigh of relief.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's been very telling to see who wants to give Donald Trump credit and who refuses to give credit to Donald Trump. I mean, plenty of Democrats. You've got Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren just refusing to even mention Donald Trump's name. And you mentioned you don't even recognise London anymore. It's a similar situation here in Sydney. Just over the weekend, there were more pro-Palestine demonstrations after a ceasefire agreement had been reached. It says a lot that there are parts of these demonstrations which is really just about Jew hatred, unfortunately. Now, it's been interesting to watch lefty politicians try and take some credit for Donald Trump's work here. UK Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson insists that the UK should be getting a fair bit of credit for Donald Trump's peace plan. Just listen to this.
We have played a key role behind the scenes in shaping this. It's right that we do so because it's in all of our interest, including our own national interest, that we move to a lasting peace in the region.
Well, when you say behind the scenes, like what? I mean, it seems to everybody else in the world that this has been done by Trump and the Israelis and Hamas. What part did we play?
These are complex matters of diplomacy that we are involved in, but we do welcome and recognise the critical role that the American government played in moving us to this point.
Esther, the US ambassador to Israel, has called her delusional, and he's not wrong about that.
Certainly not. And I think if you noticed Trevor Phillips' face while she made that preposterous statement, he couldn't actually look her in the eye and keep a straight face when he said this. And I don't think that makes for a good Sunday morning telly. But it's completely ludicrous. I mean, the fact that this government decided to recognize the state of Palestine, God knows where, because it doesn't even meet the qualifications for a state. It doesn't have a fixed territory. It certainly doesn't have a functioning government in any regard. But the fact that this government decided to pander to left-wing extremists in Britain and do that, which clearly was against the interest of any actual lasting peace, and was really annoyed the American. Well, Donald Trump's administration and Israel as well, shows that they weren't really interested in actually playing a serious hand in peace.
No.
And this is the delusion that this government operates under. Bridget Phillipson, who, again, if anyone knows her role as Education Secretary in Britain, knows that she's basically rolling back any significant reforms that the last Conservative government made with education in Britain, which is probably the only aspect of public policy that Britain isn't failing in entirely. It's not surprising that this is the kind of stuff that would come from her. But Mike Huckabee was right. The US ambassador to Israel said, of course, Britain didn't have a role in this. We're dealing with a completely neutered government, at the head of which is Keir Starmer, who can't tell his arm from his leg. And David Lammy, as Foreign Secretary, has just basically been an embarrassment to Britain on the world stage. If he's not handing out sovereign territory in the form of Chagos Islands, he's recognizing and rewarding Hamas for carrying out attacks on October 7th, which is basically what the recognition of Palestine turned out to be. So, again, this government is an embarrassment. I mean, you could just see from the disposition of Keir Starmer when he was behind Donald Trump after Donald Trump said these world leaders basically came at 20 minutes notice. He really just made him kiss the ring. And for any Brit with a sense of national pride, it's an embarrassment to watch.
No, and it's embarrassing for us here in Australia as well. Australia made the same move, recognising Palestine at the UN General Assembly, of course, while hostages were still being held by Hamas. Let's look at the UK, and the Home Office is offering a communications expert or spin doctor up to £91,000 a year to help convince the public that Labor is tackling the small boats crisis. And to decide as to whether they are tackling the boat crisis or not, let's just look at the numbers. The total number of arrivals since the start of the year is more than 35,000. That's up 33% on the same period last year and on par with the record in 2022. I mean, Esther, I don't think a spin doctor is really what the UK needs, maybe addressing the crisis.
I think they'd have a better chance of making everyone deaf and dumb and blind before they could actually hire a spin doctor that's miraculous enough in talent to convince the public what they're seeing is actually not reality. And they're taking a leaf out of Tony Blair's playbook, trying to recreate sort of an Alistair Campbell situation where they hire a spin doctor. But you can only play that card once. You can only convince the public that the Iraq War is just once. Unfortunately, people are seeing these boats coming across. They're seeing the impacts on their communities. Communities that have these migrant hotels filling up areas around the country are also rising up. So you can't hire anyone to do a Houdini act and pretend like what they see before their very eyes is not true. And it's really quite a shame, because it didn't need to get this bad. I mean, boat crossings, like you said, are up a third from what they were last year. But the fact is, Keir Starmer ran last year on the promise that the adults were back in the room and these small boats crisis will be tackled. And he cancelled the Rwanda scheme because he called it a gimmick, even though the previous Conservative government had actually hired Australian consultants to basically mimic the Australian model from back in the early 2010s, so we could get this crisis under hand. And nothing has happened. And so now what they're basically they're looking towards the Belgians, whose new prime minister is also very keen on tackling this, and the Italians and the Spanish and the Greeks to actually tackle this, because it's very clear that this government doesn't have a handle on the small boat situation. And what he's trying to do, rolling out this digital ID as a way to kind of weed out people that don't have a right to work in the UK, again, is completely tone deaf. People are not working illegally in the UK because employers that are paying them below minimum wage rates forget that they're illegal. They do it because they can get away with it. And the way to stop it is to basically stop the flow and make sure that no one who comes into Britain illegally can have a right to claim asylum, and certainly not to bring their family over, which is a sham that has actually been going on for years now, believe it or not. There are common sense ways to do this, and yet the government is not interested. Instead, they're throwing away more public money on spin doctors and trying to convince the public that what's before their very eyes is not actually what's happening.
Well, more public money. Let's look at what else they're spending money on. As we know, many parts of the world have really moved on from this woke era that we saw really peak, I think, in 2020, 2021. I mean, in America, woke seems pretty much dead, but not in Britain. It's been revealed that Britain's public sector is splurging £70 million a year on woke diversity officers. This is according to an investigation by the Mail on Sunday. So $70 million a year, Esther, on DEI. I'm not sure if that's the best use of taxpayer money.
Well, it's certainly not, especially because not a single person can actually highlight the public benefit to having people in these roles. I mean, we keep hearing that the government is tight on money and that they have to take winter fuel payments away from pensioners who have paid into the country their entire lives. But somehow there's money to pay DEI officers 60, 70, 80,000 pound salaries to do God knows what. And now this is not a surprise. I mean, in terms of public sector wastage, we see tens of billions of pounds being wasted on quangos and all of these think tanks and these organizations that are basically cronies of whoever's in power at the time. But again, this rubs to the core of the fact that we're being told that we need to have our taxes put up, that energy bills are ridiculously high because somehow we're saving the planet, and there's no money to help people that actually need to be on welfare, for example, like pensioners who can't just go out and get a second job or find a way to pay high energy bills. But somehow there's tens of millions of pounds to waste on people that literally have no public benefit. It's a complete offense. And these DEI officers that have been uncovered in this investigation are across the public sector. So we're talking the NHS, the police, the civil service, education. It's not just isolated to one public sector department. It is the entirety of the public sector, which is a complete insult to the British public. We're told our taxes have to go up, but somehow there's money to pay for these useless roles.
Finally, Esther, the BBC has had to pause its diversity workshops focused on transgender and LGBT topics whilst reviewing their compliance with the Supreme Court ruling back in April. Now, the BBC is examining whether the training materials correctly define sex in accordance with the ruling. And of course, the Supreme Court determined that sex means biological sex rather than gender identity chosen by individuals. Now, this legal clarification has prompted the BBC to reassess its approach to diversity, Esther.
Well, leave it to the BBC to need the Supreme Court to tell it that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and you can't interchange the two, especially in terms of public law and space. But it's not surprising, because what if this ruling hadn't happened, believe it or not, what would have happened is the BBC would have continued to be part of the entire ecosystem that would continue to peddle the lie that somehow, because of how you identify, you are entitled to be in spaces that are dedicated to the same sex. And in the case of women, we have to bear the brunt because we are the ones who are having our rape shelters invaded by men who claim to be women. We are the ones whose prisons are being invaded by men who claim to be women. We are the one whose bathrooms are being invaded by men who claim to be women. And like J.K. Rowling said, unless you are someone who doesn't have access to millions and millions of pounds like the Emma Watsons of the world, you tend to you will actually come to face this if you ever have to use, for example, a council-run swimming pool facility that's now pandering to this left-wing gender ideology. And the same thing applies to rape centers, for example, and shelters for women and prisons. We remember the infamous case of Isla Bryson in Scotland, a male rapist who somehow found his way into a female prison because of the ludicrous gender ID laws in Scotland. So thankfully, the BBC is starting to take this seriously. But I think what I suspect is actually happening is they're trying to stave off any lawsuits that would happen if they decided to push this gender ideology nonsense despite the Supreme Court ruling.
Writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, thank you so much for joining us.